So I just want to tell you a little bit about me. My name's Kate Fenner. I've ridden, trained and competed in several different disciplines around the world. I founded Equine Perfection back in 2001 in the UK, and then I moved home to Australia in 2005 where I started Can Do Equine. I grew up with off-the-track horses. I've always loved thoroughbreds and done a lot of work with standard breds in recent years, and it has always struck me that these horses have really not learned anything useful for pleasure riding. I took one of my father's off-the-track horses to school with me when I was young. I spent a lot of time at and around the races as a child. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney, and my project is the Equine Behaviour Assessment and Research Questionnaire, EBAR.
In today's presentation, I'd like to discuss 5 main things. The first few are just a few things that came to me when I was looking at the current code of practice. And the final 2 are proposals for you to consider to really make improvements in the welfare of the racehorses in the ACT. I feel it's important to update the welfare guidelines. So the new 5 domains model is the most current one and I think should be used. I've actually included a copy of this PDF as well as one that's particular to thoroughbred horses with the package that I gave you today. The second thing was the current level of detail in the COP as it stands. And I think in places there's way too much detail, such as bandaging and things like that for travel. So I've also included this document in my package, and I thought they did a very good job of outlining guidelines for welfare. And thirdly was about the language used. And when I looked through the current guidelines, the should was used 142 times, whereas must was only used 17 times. And I think we need to be really careful about that, because some of those things that were should, they read as recommendations. Of course, they're not enforceable. So I think that certainly all of the welfare guidelines need to be enforceable and should be using must. The 2 remaining items that I want to discuss with you today are firstly a lifetime traceability register for horses, ex-race horses, and secondly a sustainable training model for those horses. After the 730 report, all stakeholders agreed that we needed to be able to trace these animals from birth to death. But tracing in itself is great, but it's not really enough. What we need to be able to do as well is monitor these horses' behaviour. The following is going to explain how EBARC was built and how it can both trace and monitor horse behaviour over time. This is taken from a presentation to the Canadian Equestrian Federation, but is equally relevant to horses right here in the ACT. I've put the website address here for you. For those of you that are interested in the development of EBARC, it's been 8 years in the making, and I was lucky enough to come on board 3 years ago. EBARC is not developed in a full lab, with white-coated scientists. Quite the opposite. We formed an expert panel of behaviourists, veterinarians, coaches, horse trainers, welfare specialists, elite riders, and discipline specialists from around the world. This panel helped us form the EBARC prototype. This questionnaire went out to 1,300 horse owners. We wanted to include every possible question our expert panel thought might be of interest, and to be honest, I was a bit worried participants would complain about the length of the questionnaire in the feedback box we provided. Well, I needn't have worried. Not only did not one person complain about the length, but they really all had a very positive experience of the EBARC project. And most of them took the opportunity to tell us even more about the horses they'd just answered over 200 questions on. You can't say we don't love our horses. From here, after some factor analysis, which is basically working out which questions were important and which we could or should lose, we removed questions that very few people answered or items that didn't fit into one or other of the factors or groups that emerged with the analysis. Following this, we arrived at the final version of eBark that we have today. eBark is a sister project to CBark, and there's also a cat version, FeeBark. Who'd have thought you could have 100 questions on cat behaviour? But there you go, perhaps I'm just not a cat person. At first glance, you might think, okay, cat, dog, horse behaviour. You just change the questions a bit and off you go. But there's a big difference between how we interact with our horse, what we do with our horse, and what can potentially go wrong in these interactions, and our relationship with a cat or a dog. If we think about worst case scenario, what can go wrong when we take the dog to the park? Well, it might pull on the lead, jump on a passerby, or even bite someone. Now, let's take the horse out for a ride. I know, you can think of 100 potential problems even before you get the headstall on, never mind tacking up and riding the horse. There's no doubt that our relationship with our horse is complex and multifaceted. And for this reason, during the factor analysis of the eBark prototype, we found 3 main areas of interest. These were, number 1, behaviour, being the sorts of behaviours that the horse does on its own. Think of it like personality. The next was equitation. These were the behaviours that related to how the horse reacted when handled or ridden. And that's only for those horses that were ridden. The final factor is equipment and management. This, as you will have guessed, is about the tack we use with our horses and how the horse is managed on a day-to-day basis, including housing, feeding, and how often the horse is interacting with people. The CBark findings are very interesting, and eBark promises to do that and so much more for our understanding of horse behaviour, and in turn rider safety and horse welfare. One of the main aims of eBark is to identify behaviours that may be predictive of future undesirable or dangerous behaviours. For example, wouldn't it be good to know if horses that showed certain behaviours, such as pulling back when tired as youngsters, were more likely to rear under saddle, or horses that got progressively worse over time at pulling on the lead when leading were more likely to bolt later when under saddle. This knowledge would allow for early intervention, not only massively improving rider and handler safety, but most likely also improving that horse's welfare in the future because, as we know, the two go hand in hand. The sad fact is, in so many ways, horse welfare lags depressingly far behind other companion animals. And while horses are not always defined as companion animals, we all know that that's exactly what they are. They make our lives richer and so much more enjoyable just from their very presence. I can understand why it's sometimes hard for us as riders or trainers to fail to see that our practices are not best serving the horse. I was fortunate enough to be involved in a noseband tightness study in 2016 where we looked at nosebands of various tightness. I was manning the video camera, and by just watching the horses, it was impossible to say that there was any difference between the responses during the different levels of tightness. However, later, when we downloaded the data, we looked at the small behaviours such as licking, chewing and swallowing, and also the heart rate results, and the changes were significant indeed. Many of the horses on the tightest fitting didn't swallow at all for the entire 10 minutes of treatment. Now, as riders, we wouldn't notice this. Who notices how often their horse swallows normally? But particularly when coupled with the fact that dressage riders are rewarded for horses with quiet mouths and visible saliva, it's important that we know what's happening under the bonnet, so to speak. Horses are hardwired to hide pain and distress because in the wild it makes them vulnerable to attack. Prey animals, such as dogs on the other hand, will cry and whimper at the slightest thing. So it's up to us to try harder with our horses because eventually such distress, if left unresolved, will influence their behaviour. Given that, the main difference between eBark and the other bark projects as data collection tools is that eBark is a longitudinal study. While it's nice to have a snapshot of how your horse is behaving today, it's even better to be able to monitor your progress over time. By completing an AWAC survey every 6 months, you'll be able to see how changes in your training and management are reflected in behaviour, a tremendously valuable tool for coaches, trainers, and all horse owners. As you can see, the survey is divided into 2 sections. We collect detailed horse and owner demographics. These include the horse's age, breed, colour and height, as you would expect, but also details of the age the horse was first handled and started under saddle, its main riding discipline where appropriate, and so on. For owners' demographics, we include the owner's riding and handling experience, the length of time they've been around horses, and so on. Participants then move on to the training, management and behaviour questions, which make up the bulk of the survey. Of course, not all horses stay in one home their entire lives, and the exit survey asks respondents about the reasons a horse is no longer with them. This will provide useful information on why horses are changing homes and, in the future, help us to identify elements that might predict a horse having an unsettled life with ever-changing homes. Rider safety is of paramount importance, and we know that one of the biggest risks to horse welfare is problem behaviour. AWAC, being a longitudinal study, will reveal training, management and behavioural red flags that become predictors of undesirable behaviours and thus compromise rider safety and horse welfare. An example here might be the age of gelding. It is possible that the age at which a horse is gelded can predict how it might behave in the future. One thing that all stakeholders agreed on after that 7:30 report was that the first thing we need is a national horse traceability register. I'm just sharing this idea with you today informally, and this is really just the very germ of an idea of being able to use AWAC as that register. The advantage, of course, is that we could trace horses from birth right through their life cycle, and for the race horses we could have a truncated AWAC so that there's just a few questions so we know where the horses are and perhaps what their basic behaviour is like, and would enable us to better rehome those horses after racing. Once they'd left racing, we could then be collecting more behavioural information on these horses so we could find them more suitable homes and that we could monitor their ongoing welfare. Of course, one of the big problems with welfare is training, and often these horses come off the track and they have no suitable training. They're very inexpensive to buy, so they often end up in quite the wrong homes. And that's the next thing I want to discuss with you. That's the horse training passport scheme, which is something I've been thinking about for quite some time now.
There's been a lot in the media recently about the plight of the off-the-track horses, the ABC program, and there's been various articles have been written. And what I have noticed, especially on social media, is every time something comes up, you get people saying, oh yes, but it's not as bad as, you know, what's happening with the other breed of horses. It's not as bad, you know, the worst thing is the abattoir workers. That's what we've got to address. The worst thing is the overbreeding. That's what we've got to address. You know, the worst thing is there's other breeds of horses that are being slaughtered in this way. And look, all these things are true, but they all detract from the conversation. That's not the conversation we're having at the moment. The conversation we're having at the moment is how we can help these off-the-track horses. What can we do to ensure their future? And every time somebody says, oh yes, but it's not just off-the-track horses, that's right, but it really takes away from what we're discussing. What we're discussing today is what we can do now to improve the welfare and the quality of life and the future of these animals. What can we do now? What positive changes can we make today for these horses? And the off-the-track training passport proposal is one of those things that we can do. Welcome to the off-the-track training passport proposal. The proposal has several aims. to assist the horses and new owners with the transition from racing to pleasure riding, to improve horse welfare with ethical, sustainable training methods, to provide horses with improved post-racing careers, to make safer riding horses with these off-the-track horses, to empower horse owners with the tools to train their own horses, to enable horse owners to address training and behavioural issues developed during their training and racing, to make off-the-track horses a more attractive alternative to the pleasure rider, and to make the off-the-track horses a more financially viable alternative for the pleasure rider. And finally, to enable horse owners, breeders and dealers to provide for their off-the-track horses' future. There are several welfare risks faced by these off-the-track horses, and they're listed below. We know most of them. We're well aware of most of these risks, and we're going to discuss some of those in this proposal. Off-the-track horses are very versatile animals, whether they're thoroughbreds or standardbreds. There's a number of different possibilities for these horses in their post-racing careers. However, they do also pose welfare risks in their post-racing careers. We're going to discuss a few of the reasons why this is. Probably the biggest reason is this perceived zero value of the animal. So once it leaves racing, the horses really these days aren't worth much, and this is why they're ending up in the slaughter yard or the knackers. So there's two ways these horses end up at the slaughter yard. They can go directly from the racetrack, or they can take what you might call a scenic tour, where they go through several different homes, and obviously that is a much higher welfare risk for these horses. One of the big problems is that they're very cheap to buy, and they're given away. I'm pretty sure that I could go, to a trainer or a racetrack today and pick up a couple of horses if I so wished. They're often perceived as project horses. Now, I don't think this is a great thing for any horse. A project horse is something that seems to be disposable. If it doesn't work out, but you get another one. A project horse, it seems to be something that you can experiment with. These horses often end up with unscrupulous dealers, where they're given a couple of weeks of training and then quite often sold on as stock or some other breed. Of course, these horses then end up in the hands of inexperienced riders. Novice riders quite often have off-the-track horses, and a green rider with a horse that really hasn't got any suitable training for pleasure riding is a disaster waiting to happen. These horses often also end up with people that are financially challenged. So because they're cheap to buy or they're given away quite often, or just cost a few $100s, people that really don't understand the needs of these horses end up having them in the paddock, and that is a real welfare risk for these animals. So what we need to do is to add some value to these horses, and the way to do that is to provide them with some training. So there's a couple of options here, and there are already people retraining horses off the track, and that's terrific for a small number of horses. We can move a small number of horses through there. They'll get retrained for pleasure ride, and they can be moved on to suitable owners. That's fine. However, the problem is that once the new owner has the horse, that training is not likely to maintain unless we also educate the owner. So the real advantage of this passport scheme is that it educates the horse owner. So it's suitable for any level of rider. It also could be purchased at any time during the horse's racing career. So it could be purchased as soon as the horse is registered to race. The horse could go through its entire racing career owning this passport and wouldn't be used until it retired. It could be bought when the horse was retired. It gives you ethical training. The training uses learning theory, equitation science. It's applicable to all disciplines. So, these horses are very versatile. And so that's terrific because people are going to want to do different things with them. And so this training They can take this training, gives them all the foundation training they need to go into any discipline that they would like. It's also applicable to all ages of horse and owners, so it has a huge potential reach. So training passports can be purchased at any time during the horse's racing career. Of course, it's best to purchase them right at the beginning when there's still money around. This is a big problem with these horses, you know. At the beginning, everyone's terribly enthusiastic about these horses, and there is a lot of money around horses. Syndicated, the owners are putting out a lot of money to buy the horses, to put the horses into training. This would be a small price to ensure the horse's future. So ideally, this could be bought when the horse was registered to race. That would be ideal. Of course, you know, that is going to be something that might happen in the future. It's not happening now. So at the moment, I think we open this up to any horse that's either currently on the track or off a track horse, or a horse that's been bred to be raced. The training passport belongs to the horse, and that's the beauty of it, is that the horse owns the training. So whatever happens to this horse in the future, the training moves with the horse. So if you buy an off-the-track horse that has this passport, then you, as the owner, you can access that training. If you sell the horse, you lose the training, the new owner gets the training. And this is what happens to these horses. You know, occasionally the Racing Australia is looking at the first home they go to. They're not doing it very often from what we see on the ABC program, but they are doing it sometimes, looking at the first home this horse goes to. But then what happens is that it gets sold on. You know, the horse develops some behavioural problems, or the owner realises they're not up to the job, or the owner realises, actually, this horse isn't trained for dressage, it's not really trained for anything that I want to do, and the horse is a bit unsafe, so they sell the horse on, and then the new owner has all the same problems. But this training is a passport, so it belongs to the horse. So when the horse is sold, it takes access to the training with it, and so the new owner can then access the training. There are a number of rescue and charity organisations that rehome horses, and so for them, this training passport will be a useful way to bring in some extra revenue for their horses, as they can sell it as an affiliate member. So we'll just have a quick look at what's inside the training. The training moves you through everything you need to start a horse or to retrain a horse. In this situation, we're retraining the horse. The thoroughbreds and the standardbreds don't know a lot about being a pleasure horse. You know, they really haven't learned a lot that's terribly useful for us as riders if we want to go out and do jumping or dressage or just ride around and trail ride. They really don't have a lot of useful training for that purpose. And so this will take you from the very beginning of assessing your horse's emotional level, getting the horse into the engagement zone, getting your horse soft and responsive in the bridle, all the way through to the lateral work and flying changes, depending on what discipline you decide to go into. The training is accessible on the computer, on the iPhone. You can watch it anywhere. It's all online and it's all downloadable, and you're able to view it wherever you are. One of the difficulties with these off-the-track horses is there's very little support. So even if you get a horse that's been through a retraining program, you are pretty much on your own when you get that horse home. And that is where the training passport really comes into its own. The Can-Do Equine has a wonderful supportive community. We have 2 Zoom meetings a week. One is set for a suitable time for Europe, and one is set for a suitable time for North America, and both work well for Australians, of course. And with this training passport program, we're going to have a 3rd meeting, which is just going to be for off-the-track horses, but it'll be an hour long, it'll be once a week, and you'll be able to attend in person, and you can ask me questions. I'll be there. You can ask me questions. You can chat with the other off-the-track owners, and these meetings will also be recorded, so you can watch them at any time, or you can just download the audio and you can listen to it on your way to work, in the car, while you're taking a walk, while you're working your horse. As the program grows, we're going to set up training communities around the country so that you can get together as a group, all passport owners, and you can work on these things together. You can work give to the bit, you can work your shoulder control. If let's say you're all really progressing well, you might all get together one weekend and do some lateral work. You've all got the same material, you're all very much working on the same page. Remember, it does belong to the horse, so if you sell your off-the-track horse, the training passport goes with the horse. But it'd be a great thing to buy as a Christmas gift for somebody, for your horse. It'd be a great thing to buy as a Christmas gift for your horse. So do have a think about it. You can also pay for it in installments, just 4 payments. What I would like to see is a set of horses on the program, and we can start setting up community groups, the groups in your area that can meet regularly and work together on the training. Once we have established a few of those groups, we're in a much stronger position to take the proposal to Racing Australia and see if we can get them to implement the off-the-track training passport proposal for all horses going into training, get them to implement this at the beginning of these horses' racing careers so that when they do retire from racing, they actually have some value. They have these passports so that when somebody's looking for a horse, they would really consider an off-the-track horse, because that off-the-track horse comes with this training. It comes with this community of like-minded people that support one another for the rest of this horse's life.
In conclusion, I'd like to say that there's really no quick fix, but someone needs to take the lead, and I hope that's the ACT. We need to know where these horses are now. We need to know what their current welfare status is, and we need to know whether their behaviour is getting better or it's getting worse. We need to know what those red flags are. This can be done with eBark. eBark is currently available to all. It's an ongoing project, it's not going anywhere, and it's absolutely free for users. The data are helping to provide an evidence base that's needed to properly manage these animals in the decades to come. Over time, we'll learn which behaviour horses display during their racing careers that makes them suitable for rehoming and which can potentially make them dangerous. We'll learn how to better match ex-racehorses to potential new owners. Then, once we've found suitable homes for these horses, we need to empower the owners with the knowledge and skills to further that horse's training. Horses are not machines. They don't have buttons. One can't simply install new software, such as send the horse out to a trainer for a time, and expect the horse to behave in that manner forever. Training, and thus maintaining welfare, is ongoing and must ultimately be the responsibility of the horse owner. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you today. It's been a great pleasure, and I'd love to answer any questions you might have.